Cloak and Dagger, wielders of the Light and Dark Force, are a unique dual hero in Marvel Rivals. When playing as this character, you're switching between Ty Johnson, Cloak, a damage dealer wielding the Dark Force, who blinds his enemies and does sustained channel damage onto targets, and Tandy Bowen's Dagger, who throws out light projectiles that heal allies and damage enemies. The key to playing this character is about understanding the right time to be in which form, and how to get the most out of your abilities and your cooldowns. For the most part, you're going to be spending a lot of time as Dagger, as that's the primary form for being a strategist, and you'll be switching over to Cloak in important moments where damage is going to be more important than healing. So we're going to start it off with Dagger. Dagger's basic attack, Light Force Dagger, shoots out a small projectile that does a small amount of damage or a burst of healing onto a target and all targets around them. This is a tracking projectile. As long as your cursor is near the target, it's going to track onto them and apply to them. And it'll prefer to apply heals over applying damage. When hitting an ally, it does a primary heal onto the main target, then does a splash AoE ring around it that applies a small amount of healing to nearby allies. When sustaining multiple targets with this, you want to be switching back and forth which target you're applying your heals to be able to spread the healing out a little bit more effectively. If you miss this attack, it does a bounce, and if it has a allied target nearby after the bounce, it'll ricochet and bounce towards that ally. However, the ricochet will not track onto enemies, so you're not going to be able to bounce it off of surfaces and deal damage to enemies very reliably. Her secondary or right-click ability is Dagger Storm. This shoots out a projectile that detonates into a field of healing, and any allies within the zone will receive constant healing over the duration. You cannot re-detonate this to create the field on your own. It has to hit a surface to become the field. So you're going to need to aim this onto the ground, walls, or roof nearby allies that need to receive this healing. Her E is Veil of Light Force. This shoots out a square projectile forward, and any allies hit by it will be healed, as well as receive a buff increasing healing received by them for a short duration. Dagger's base healing is not particularly high. You're going to be needing both her Dagger Storm and her Veil to be effectively healing targets, rotating between the two abilities to keep the cooldowns managed. You don't want to go long periods of time where you don't have one of the two available secondary forms of healing, because your basic daggers are just not going to be able to keep targets up through the flurry of incoming damage. The left shift ability will transform you from Dagger into Cloak. Cloak's basic attack, Dark Force Cloak, is a channeled attack that will latch onto a target near your reticle and deal consistent damage over time. It's moderate range consistent damage that does not require particularly effective aim. As long as your cursor is near the target, you will continue to deal sustained damage to them, and it's very hard for enemies to be able to get away from it. It has unlimited ammo, so you never need to reload this, and you can just keep on channeling. His secondary or right click is Dark Teleportation. He'll flourish his cloak around him, applying a buff to himself and all allies that makes them intangible, during which they cannot receive any damage from exterior forces until they do any ability or after 1.5 seconds. While in Dark Force Cloak, you can hold jump to go upwards. This ability is really useful to protect allies from powerful ultimates if you can time it correctly. It's also your main way to get away from incoming divers. If anybody gets on top of you, you'll quickly do a Dark Force Cloak and then fly up to a safe location. It takes a little bit of skill and practice, but you're going to want to be able to figure out how to transform from Dagger quickly into Cloak and apply the Dark Veil Cloak during critical moments like a Jeff ultimate or Iron Man ult coming at your team to be able to protect everyone from the incoming assault. His E ability, Terror Cape, unleashes a square similar to Dagger's, but this time it is an offensive ability. It'll deal a chunk of damage, blind targets that are hit by it, and apply a debuff that increases the damage taken by the target for a couple of seconds. This ability is really powerful. A damage amplification for your entire team means you're going to be able to melt targets that get hit by it quite easily, and enemy teams are going to be surprised by how much damage they're about to receive once they get blinded. And of course, left shift on Cloak switches you back to Dagger. Switching to Cloak and back to Dagger fully refills your ammunition. So if you need to reload, a quick swap to Cloak and unleashing an ability and switching back to Dagger can be really effective. The time difference from her reload animation to the switch attack switch is not particularly significant, and getting the damage boost from the blind is almost always going to be better in combat. They have a shared ultimate in Eternal Bond. When activated, they're going to do a series of dashes, and each dash is going to leave a trail behind them that applies healing to allies and damage to enemies. This is one of the most powerful healing ultimates in the game. The amount of healing produced by this field is massive, and you're going to want to be able to have your team stack in this and receive major healing on important objectives. After each dash, you can change your trajectory by just switching over where you're looking, and you'll dash in the new direction. After each dash, you should readjust to make sure your field is in the appropriate place for an ideal play on the objective. When a major team fight breaks out, you want to make sure to have this ability available to be able to heal up your allies and then be able to do consistent damage to your enemies as your allies are receiving the healing from your ultimate. This is one of the best times to spend time in Cloak. All that constant healing will mean that you can push out some serious damage. Be careful when you're using this. At the end of each dash, you become stationary, which makes you a big target for several players. Hawkeye should be able to headshot you, Magneto's toss his ultimate and take you out, or if you end the dash in the middle of Penny's spider mines, you're gonna get detonated before your next dash starts. So think about who you're up against and where your dash path is leading you. Make sure you're dashing through targets and landing at areas that you're not gonna take immediate damage that'll kill you. Because if you die, your field goes away and all that healing is lost. Cloak and Dagger are the activator for a team up with Moon Knight, which will give him an invisibility field, making him a lot harder to keep track of. But we'll go over that in his video. So playing as Cloak and Dagger, you want to stay in visible range of your vanguards as well as your dive and melee style duelists. Constantly be checking around you and bouncing about, looking for allies that need to receive healing, and shooting shots down corridors that your divers have gone down to so that the bounce ricochet might apply a heal to them. You have a very fast rate of fire for your healing, and you're able to shoot these out at all sorts of different angles, and because you don't need to particularly aim it, some spare shots might receive healing onto targets that wouldn't have gotten healed otherwise. Try and alternate who your healing is applying to get the most out of the bubble explosion, healing multiple targets at a time. And when your basic healing isn't enough to keep your targets up, apply one of your two abilities, either tossing down a Dagger Storm, which should sustain allies pretty significantly, or pumping out a Veil of Light Force, drastically increasing the healing received on all of the targets. On applying either of these, it can be a good time to switch to Cloak and send out a Veil of Darkness at your enemy team. The spike of damage as well as boost of incoming damage dealt to those enemies can surprise the strategists on the other side and might allow your team to get a kill. If at any time you have both of your special abilities on cooldown and you have not used your Veil, is a great time to switch over and Veil, because your basic healing isn't that effective, and actually blinding targets and applying a damage amplification boost is more beneficial for the strategist to do than to toss out basic small healing. Mastering this character takes a little bit of understanding of enemy abilities. Knowing when is a time that you are able to switch over and apply damage to your enemies while your allies are able to stay sustained, versus when it's time to just focus in on the healing and keeping targets up is going to be really important to mastering your character. A mistake a lot of Cloak and Daggers get into is spending too much time channeling into enemies as Cloak and not paying attention to allies that need your healing. You should be spending short bursts of time as Cloak, doing your blind and a little bit of damage, rather than just sustain constantly damaging targets. Unless your team is benefiting from a major healing ultimate, you're going to be wanting to constantly switch back and forth between Cloak and Dagger, applying damage and healing to all targets available. You can apply a huge chunk of healing onto targets by putting out your Veil and your Dagger Storm at the same time, but that's almost always going to be wasted. It's better to stagger them so you have a longer extended time of enhanced healing rather than trying to dump it all at one time. A single target is going to get healed to maximum almost immediately from the combo of those two abilities, and the rest of the additional healing ends up being wasted. And with all that, I hope you have a better understanding of how to play Cloak and Dagger. Now go out and show your mastery of the Light and Dark Force. In the next video, we're going to talk about the Invisible Woman, the first new character added in Season 1 of Marvel Rivals. She's a powerful control strategist that keeps her allies healed and her enemies out of position. But we'll talk about that next time. Sazaze.